You're kind of living more or less kind of like a fugitive in Mexico. Any thought that maybe that's not the best place to be in or something like that? Or maybe why are we still here?
I'm convinced that not really anywhere on this planet is safe 100%. I've known 4 people in my life that were close to me that have been murdered. 3 of them were in Ohio. I don't want to live in the United States, but I do want to be able to visit because I have family there and I have friends there. And I also don't want to live in Mexico illegally anymore. I want to come back. We heard your interview with Joe Rogan on the carnivore diet. And that's actually what got me to give it a try at that point. I kind of thought I might be dying with the way I felt most of the time. Thank you for talking about this stuff because it really helped me to get hope for life again.
Hey, good morning. Happy Monday, everybody. We are scheduled to have a guest today, so I'm just waiting a few minutes to see if she arrives. Interesting story. She is somebody. There's a HBO documentary called Anarchists, which she was apparently. There she is. Okay, I see her there. So, good morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Well, first of all, thank you for taking the time to chat with us. It's good to meet you. Where are you located currently?
I'm in Mexico.
You're in Mexico. Okay. So you've been there for a while. You've been there for a while. Well, I was just telling the folks that you were part of a sort of an HBO documentary that came out. I have not yet seen it, so I haven't a chance to see it. But if you'd be so kind just to kind of give us a little bit of your background and kind of start telling us a little bit about your story, if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's it's a big enough story to where it ended up on HBO, which I still like. Mine's kind of blown on that. But yeah, I'm, for lack of a better way of putting it, I'm an anarchist and I have been for a long time. More of an agorist, which is kind of like an anarchist that actually does things instead of just complaining online. But about 7 years ago, I ended up getting arrested with my partner at the time in Ohio for cannabis. And I was kind of raised by anarchists and my mom was on the run for most of my childhood. So to go running to Mexico wasn't necessarily off the table. So that's what we did. We ran to Mexico and essentially started a new life here involved with the Anarchapulco conference. And that's what the series is about. The series is also about the murder of that partner of mine, which, that happened about 7 months into our carnivore journey. So what's interesting about the series, but not necessarily talked about in it, is you can see the progression of me from like my pre-carnivore, very sickly days until, now where I'm more or less healed from a lot of the stuff that I dealt with. But yeah, that's kind of the synopsis. It's hard to condense down, 6 years into, a couple of minutes. But yeah, so I've been living in Mexico and right before, like about 8 months before the murder happened was when we heard your interview with Joe Rogan on the carnivore diet. And that's actually what got me to give it a try. At that point, I kind of thought I might be dying with the way I felt most of the time.
Wow, there's a lot of stuff in there to talk about. So I have not heard the term agorist before. I mean, I've obviously heard of anarchy or anarchist before. And so what does that mean to you? And can you define that a little bit better for me, if you don't mind?
An agorist is somebody who we recognize, like we're not fans of the state, but we recognize that it exists. Mm-hmm. And we try to find ways to live free in spite of it, finding loopholes, finding ways to, not pay taxes and involve ourselves in the counterculture. I'm more likely to buy things from like another agorist than I am from just like, Walmart or something like that. Like in Mexico, that manifests in, I go to the markets where you don't have to pay taxes on the stuff that you buy, the meat that you buy and stuff like that. Whereas in the supermarkets, they charge 16% tax here. That's just one small way. I have an agorist crochet business where I take orders and I make things and I take cryptocurrency. But that for me, the real big difference between an agorist and an anarchist is an agorist is somebody who tries to put their ideals in practice while understanding that there is a state and, deciding what kind of risks they want to take on. Whereas a lot of anarchists I know don't really at all live by their ideals. They just spend a lot of time complaining on the internet.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. A lot of people yelling at the TV set, or the modern version is complaining on the internet. So as far as, would that, I assume a lot of people that are into this agorist or agory, I'm not sure even what the adverb is for that, but is there, or adjective rather, is there a lot of people living off the grid? It's because I see a lot of people that live off the grid and they
yes, exactly. Like when I was living in, I don't quite have the money to do that again here, but when we were living in Acapulco, we had solar power. We were growing our own food. First, it started with like fruits and vegetables, but like as time progressed, and when the murder happened, I had a whole bunch of chickens and ducks and quails and stuff like that. I was trying to raise my own meat. But yeah, that's extremely common, as people that are living within the agora, as we like to call it. These are the people making their own medicines. These are the people who are trying to live off the grid, who, do rainwater collection as opposed to government water, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, some of the laws around that. So I think in many places, collecting rainwater for drinking is illegal. I know there have been some crackdowns in certain farming practices. I know we've seen like Amish farmers being persecuted for raising meat in a way that people that are buying from are okay with. But you said you guys fled from Ohio due to cannabis-related things. Now, in many states in the United States today, cannabis is legal for both medicinal and recreational purposes. What were the laws like in Ohio? How did you guys end up fleeing? Why did you guys decide to flee?
Well, when we got arrested, the laws were still, it was illegal for both medical and recreational use. They were passing a law, in the process of passing a law that I think got passed within a year of me getting arrested. But I was told when I was arrested that didn't matter. I had committed the crime before it was legal. But basically, the state of Ohio still, even with medical use, has some pretty backwards laws when it comes to extracts, which is what we were consuming. If you have butane and weed together in Ohio, you have a felony on your hands just for having them in the same place. And if you have them in the same place, they also tack on a felony for manufacture. So assembly of chemicals plus manufacture. And it was just one of those things where I had some pretty ridiculous post-bond restrictions where I was being drug tested every day. And I was a chronic user because I had broken my jaw when I was 19 and had chronic pain from it, which I later realized was a big part of my diet, but the ongoing chronic pain, that is. Anyway, it was just, I had a bunch of felonies. I had I had to take drug tests every day. And then I had a judge, the last time I went to court, asked me if I was taking the tests. And I said yes. And she asked me if I passed them. And I had taken one earlier that day. And I was like, no. And she told me I had until the next day to pass or I was going back to jail, which was basically telling me that I needed to go and find a way to lie on my drug tests from there on out until the trial, or I needed to run. And considering I had contracted scabies while I was in jail, I wasn't really interested in going back. So yeah, it was one of those things where like, maybe I would have gotten some years probation. Maybe I would have just gotten some years in prison, but considering my upbringing and considering the fact that they seemed determined to put me back into jail where I, got a pretty disgusting parasite like skin illness while I was there, I was not at all interested in doing that, especially considering I was very much anti-government, very much anti-state.
Yeah, I can see that. Now, I'm just curious about the butane thing, because I've got butane in my, we have cooking, little cooking torches that run on butane. Why is butane a felony, or what's the concern about
that? So butane is often used to extract cannabis oil from cannabis. So, and that's like dabs, wax, whatever you want to call it. But I at a certain point, we stopped smoking flower itself and consuming flower itself, and we started consuming only the oil. And I mean, it was just easier to, it was easier to consume in a lot of ways. It wasn't as hard on the lungs, stuff like that. So it was one of those things where like they made this law a few months before I got arrested because they were trying to crack down on people that were producing this oil. And the only other like people that I know of in jail that had gotten this charge were people that were producing meth. So it was either, the chemicals for the assembly of chemicals charge were either the chemicals to produce meth or cannabis and butane, because all you need to make oil with is cannabis and butane.
I see.
Because apparently it's a really dangerous substance, even though like in my experience it's healthier to consume and it's actually not that dangerous to produce.
So you guys go down to Mexico, I guess maybe Acapulco, and there's some there's some sort of anarchist community, crypto anarchist, self-reliant, off the grid type of thing, or what's going on? What's the deal on that?
Well, that's what we thought we were walking into. We had just come from the Fireweed University community in Detroit, which was really that sort of community. And we were under the impression that something similar was happening in Acapulco. What we really kind of found when we got there was it was a bunch of rich, snooty vegans. And like something not mentioned in the series that is actually a big part of the conflict that happened within the community. The conflict is covered, but not this specific part of it. It was the opinion of the people that were running the event at the time and running the community, the heads of the community, that you couldn't be an anarchist and still consume animal products, that it was inherently violent in nature. And it was kind of a prevailing thing in the community, and it got worse because like, after we went carnivore, and we started to feel better from it, we started hosting what we called were meetups, which were they were punny. It was MEAT ups. And we were just bringing people in the community either to our house or to our friend's restaurant and cooking meat for them and serving carnivore only food. Which, that kind of caught on more than not. What I find interesting now is when I came to this community in the first place, a lot of the people that I met were vegans and they were very dogmatic about it. And a lot of those same people are no longer vegans.
Yeah,
so
that's not surprising. Yeah, we see that all the time. Obviously, a lot of vegans are very, very, very activist and dogmatic and swear they'll never change. And then a couple years later, they're no longer vegan. So I guess if everybody's vegan in these crypto anarchist communities, it kind of dashes my dreams of going there now, perhaps.
Well, it's not that way anymore. And I want to be like very clear on that. I really appreciate the shift that I've experienced. The majority, like I know I could probably think of 10 people that were hardcore vegans in the community that are now mostly carnivore. So it's definitely completely shifted and it is no longer dogmatic in any one way. Actually, what we're trying to do is we have like an Anarch-COVID event, which is kind of like how to deal with the COVID stuff. And what we're trying to do in the next one is we want to have a panel of like both sides of it, but of people that are willing to not be dogmatic about it, to really discuss diet and, how to approach that. Mm-hmm. And that's not something that the event or the community has done in the past. But that being said, the people who produce the event are now me and my best friend, Kat, who was a vegetarian for 17 years and quit being a vegetarian about 3 years ago because she's experiencing some serious health issues.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you want to get into this, but you mentioned your partner was murdered. What happened there? I mean, obviously it's got to be a horrible situation. How did that play out? What was it? Did they catch you murdered him? Was it, why did it happen?
Well, I mean, the series goes into somewhat incredible detail on it, but the thing is, like, I have my theories, but it's one of those situations where I'm not fully even sure what happened. My gut instinct is it had something to do with the cannabis that we were growing. In the series, we are openly accused of being for lack of a better way of putting it, drug kingpins, coke dealers. Because we had let somebody that was selling coke live with us for a few months, stupidly. My partner did anyway, because we needed help with our farm. We had like 100 chickens and 20 ducks, and we were running our own events, and it was a lot to deal with. And so we let this guy move in, and he got a bunch of heat on him because he was very obnoxious. And when we kicked him out of our lives, he eventually started sending his heat in our direction. So it's one of those things where, like, it's kind of, there are a lot of conflicting stories on what happened, but my gut instinct on what happened, and knowing what I know about Mexico, is it doesn't really matter what you're producing. I will pause here to say that when we moved to Acapulco, we were told that it was fine to sell weed, but up until really right before the murder, we were just processing the weed that we bought from the cartel into oil and selling that to the gringos. So the cartel was still more or less getting their cut, you know? But then we started finally growing our own weed successfully. And we had a successful harvest right before the murder happened. So it's one of those things where I kind of think it was more related to that, because like in Acapulco specifically, you can get killed for owning a tortilla shop that's successful and refusing to pay extortion. And I know a specific story where this happened. In the state of Michoacan, you can get killed for defending the forests that protect the monarch butterfly sanctuaries, because they want to cut them down for both the lumber and to replace them with avocado trees. You know, you can get killed for producing avocados and not paying your local cartel. So it's not so cut and dry is in the way that some people think it is. But
I mean, you know, obviously when you're in and around people who make their living selling and dealing in drugs, and there's a lot of crime that goes with that, including, you know, murder and stuff like that. Any thought that maybe that's not the best place to be in, or something like that, or maybe why are we still here?
Well, here's my thoughts on that. I've known 4 people in my life that were close to me that have been murdered. 3 of them were in Ohio. My little brother being one of them, for drugs, no less, for money he owed a drug dealer, but he was murdered for drugs. My cousin was murdered he got in trouble bringing a semi of weed from Michigan to Ohio. And the people that had financed that thought that he was going to talk, so they killed him, you know? So, I mean, I'm convinced that not really anywhere on this planet is safe 100%. That being said, I have moved out of Acapulco just because it's just a sea of bad memories and mosquitoes and shitty meat quality. I have a very different lifestyle now, especially now I've even quit consuming cannabis because I found a study that basically implied that chronic cannabis use really affects the pancreas, and can cause you to stop producing certain digestive enzymes, which so far seems to make sense because I'm able to eat more with less discomfort than I was before I quit the cannabis. So to an extent, but you know, the majority of people that come here really don't experience issues. And a part of what led to the issue with my ex being murdered was he made a lot of enemies, both within our community and outside of it, because he was a very abrasive person. You know, it was an abusive relationship with me, which is what I think led to where my body state was when I started carnivore. So yeah, as long as you come to Mexico and you aren't an asshole and you don't step on toes of people and you just live your life, and, you know, kind of like in the United States, if you're not an asshole, nobody will try to hurt you.
I mean, generally that's good advice. I mean, sometimes it doesn't, you still get, you know, in the wrong path of things. But let me ask you a little bit more about your own personal health journey, because you said you were quite, you know, you had a lot of health issues, and then you discovered I guess you saw me on Rogan and discovered carnivore. What was going on there? How did that happen?
So at that point in time, my mom, my whole life, had a lot of health issues. By the time she died, she couldn't really eat anything without throwing it up later. She had horrible chronic pain. And I kind of just thought, before I found the carnivore diet, I kind of just thought that I was just I had some sort of autoimmune thing. And maybe that's true. I haven't had any of these things officially diagnosed, mostly lack of money. It's hard to get diagnoses for things. But I was starting to have a lot of the same issues. Like I spent most of my days nauseous. Like I couldn't really do much physical activity without like, having to sit down and calm my stomach. And I was dizzy all the time. I had horrible migraines that would put me to bed at 7 p.m. every day. Like I was just living a really horrible quality of life. Like I had IBS. It was really scary because I was only like 24, 25 years old at the time. And it felt like my body was failing me. Like I felt, like I was falling apart and that something really serious was going on. I wasn't able to sleep because of it. Cause like I'd wake up in the middle of the night and, you roll over and you go back to sleep. Well, sometimes when I'd wake up, I'd roll over and make myself motion sick and have to get up and, essentially try not to throw up for a while. I didn't realize at the time that like it was primarily the food that I was eating because I was basically eating a standard American diet. I was with emphasis on junk food, just because that's how I was raised. It's also worth mentioning that I was diagnosed with malnutrition as a kid because my mom was kind of a fail in a lot of ways and she didn't really feed us that well. And it kind of set me up badly for adulthood. And then add the stresses of life and an abusive relationship, and my body was starting to really fail me. Like I was covered in sores, and you can see that in the series. A lot of people imply that I was like a heroin addict or something, which I've never been into those drugs. But I can see where they would say that because I was just covered in open sores from chronic cystic acne, literally all over my body. And then I found the carnivore diet, and my partner was like, he basically, pushed me into it because I was like, man, I don't want to eat only meat. Like, I'm a good cook. I like to cook a lot of things. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And he was basically like, look, you're afraid that you're falling apart, but you're not willing to try it. And that was one instance in which I was appreciative of him being pushy because I actually did try it. And like, I definitely went through some mental stuff for a long time where I was pissed that, I only felt better eating mostly meat or only meat, but I kind of started to embrace it, especially after the murder. It was like the one thing I felt I had control over. And so I dived into it because I realized you're not supposed to have headaches every day and horrible IBS symptoms and nausea constantly and all the other things that I was experiencing. I just thought that was, part of getting older because that's what my mom experienced. But apparently that's not how things are supposed to be. I did that for a long time, exclusively almost 2 years. I did only beef for about 7 months after the murder and a month before the murder too. And I was able to figure out what my trigger foods are and what things I should really avoid and what, how to proceed.
Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. If you guys are enjoying these success stories, well, you can become your own success story. You can do that by heading over to CarnivoreDiet. You can sign up for a free 30-day trial and get started today. We're looking forward to supporting you. Our community is wonderful, and we'd love to see your success. So as far as, it's how did that, as you incorporated food, and you mentioned you were in Acapulco and you said Acapulco had kind of crappy or shitty meat is what you said. How did you get food to eat there? How did that work for you? What were you eating?
Well, I was like going to the marketplace a lot and I was getting essentially like low quality grass-fed beef. And I say low quality because like, it doesn't rain 8 months out of the year there. So like, there's not really much for grass. And it's one of those things where it was kind of, it was just not very enjoyable to do carnivore until I moved. And I moved to the state of Michoacan. And like this state is known for, the high quality meat. It's got a lot of cows. It's got a lot of grassy areas that are naturally grassy. And I just remember like when I moved, it was so much easier to stick to the diet and to really enjoy the diet because the meat was just much better quality, much better texture, better tasting. I just kind of suffered my way through it in the time that I was in Acapulco, if I'm being honest. Like I was eating a lot of steak and stuff, but it was low quality steak. It was just kind of, very lean, very tough.
Mm-hmm.
Had to be cooked a certain way, or it wasn't very good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can see that. So you have a lot of lean meat, which is hard because you need at least a decent amount of fat to have energy. I was making my own beef tallow too. But it didn't taste very good because of the quality, which that got a lot better when I moved as well. You mentioned that there's been a shift within your local community, and I don't know if there's a broader anarchist community worldwide, nationwide. I don't know how many people, maybe you have an idea how many people participate in this. I am aware, I know a lot of people within sort of the crypto space that have adopted, a carnivore sort of lifestyle that seems to be growing, and there's quite a bit of them. Are you seeing a lot of people, is there a shift away from sort of maybe a veganism diet to more carnivore in general in that community?
Yeah, that is what I'm noticing. I think the veganism fad in our community only lasted about as long as most vegans stay vegan, if I'm being honest. It was kind of like 3 or 4 years where it was like most of the speakers at Anarchapulco were vegan or vegan tolerant. And then about 2020, which was the first year, I actually spoke at the event. I did 2 speeches, one of which is shown in the series and the other one isn't, but it was on the health stage, and it was about the carnivore diet. And that was really the first time that the event had embraced the carnivore diet. And when I started the carnivore diet, I did it really publicly. It was very much this is what I'm going through. This is what I'm experiencing. This is how I'm feeling. This is how my body looks. And I've had a lot of people, specifically a lot of vegans, contact me for advice on how to start eating meat again. It's really exciting because at that point, they were my friends, and I worried about them. The more I got into the carnivore thing, the more I started to worry about the vegans that weren't, complete dicks to everybody that they talked to about it. It was just like, okay. And it was sad for them to come to me and be like, hey, think you're wrong with something with this meat thing. I'm suffering. But it was exciting to see people starting to choose themselves and to choose their own health instead of just let's do it for the animals. And there are still definitely clearly some vegans in the community, but the ones that are left really for the most part aren't that dogmatic. The majority of the people, and this is in the greater anarchist community, know that taking care of yourself is more important than a moral standpoint. Because I get the vegan standpoint, morally speaking, to an extent. I'm an animal lover. I love animals, even cows, very sweet animals. I've had a cow lick my hand and give kisses before, but I also know that cows can be raised humanely and harvested humanely. And that happens more, I think, in Mexico than it does in the United States as far as that. I've seen a lot of happy cows. Even in the city that I live in, I've seen my first apartment here. I woke up one morning to the mooing of cows, and there were 30 cows just hanging out in my street. So they're happier in Mexico. And I think it's just been a huge shift within the community and just in general. With people that I know going from, hardcore vegan to, okay, I need to take care of my body. A lot of them experience fertility issues and stuff like that. And it's sad to see, but it's good to see them get over it.
And I certainly agree with, there are very, very good ways to raise animals to where they have a very good life, and many of them do. And it's up to you to choose to support the people that do that. I hear when vegans talk about they're trying to do their best to minimize because they know they can't eliminate suffering and death. Well, the best thing you can really do is just get somebody that's treating cows well, avoiding pesticides and herbicides, and you have the least death if you're worried about that. But let me ask you about this Agorism movement, I guess, if you want to call it that. What is sort of the goal or the end game there? Is there an end game? Is it dissolution of all governments? What is the framework that's supposed to happen?
I think for anarchists, the focus is more on dissolution of government. But the thing with agorists is instead of trying to break something down and destroy it, we just try and build what we would rather see instead. We try to build the systems that, find ways of replacing those things about government that we don't like, be it police with private security, the state, subsidized, factory farming thing. I have a lot of friends who, exclusively grow all the chicken that they eat each year and all of their eggs and stuff like that to reduce that impact. And also to show like, look, you don't necessarily need to rely on this behemoth state. You don't have to use their money. You don't have to follow their rules necessarily. It's more about building what you would rather see. And the idea is like the end goal would be eventually enough people would see working systems that are voluntary outside of the state, that they would just go and be involved with those systems. And then if enough people remove their support for the state, like how is it going to function at that point? If there are better ways of dealing with healthcare and, food supply and all of these things. And that's the idea. It's about building what you would rather see and trying things. A lot of what I see in the anarchist community is, well, we have this idea and this is how it might work. But like what I see agorists doing is, okay, that's how it might work. Well, let's try it and see if that actually works or if it would have to work a different way. That's the real big difference I've noticed.
Yeah, that is, because like I said, there's a lot of theory out there. And that's the same thing I say when it comes to nutrition. There's a lot of theories out there. What happens in the actual application in the real world and what are the results? And that's why, this carnivore diet thing is so intriguing, because the theory is you would get sick and be very, very unhealthy by eating all meat based on what we've been told. But the reality is much different than that. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And so, in your new situation, so just out of curiosity, a day of eating for you is what? What are you doing now? You said you were very strict. Now you're kind of a little bit more relaxed, I guess.
Well, okay. So, I still have a pretty small list of things that I can eat, but I go by based off of what my body feels. If I start to feel the way that I did before I went carnivore in any way, I'll cut it out again. But I eat still a lot of meat, but mostly chicken currently, just because that's what my body seems to be into right now. And everything from, I do eat some rice, and I can have some corn and some vegetables and some fruits, not all of them. But for the most part, I still don't eat most things. Like I haven't had bread since I started the carnivore diet. I haven't had pizza, I haven't cookies, cakes, any of that stuff is not a part of my life still. But I am able to eat things like coconut and like avocado and tomatoes. And so I can enjoy tacos living in Mexico, depending on where they're from and if they have corn tortillas, because I find, I don't know about the United States, but Mexico, they kind of have their own corn strains used for certain things. And it seems to be not so hard on the body as I hear other people reporting corn to be. My hunch is that it's because it's heirloom strains from Mexico that they're growing primarily. A day of eating, it really depends, but for the most part, it's kind of closer to what most people would say is like a whole foods balanced sort of thing, but it's still very restrictive. And if I notice, I start to suffer from any of the things that are on my okay list, I will remove them for a while and try again and see, how I feel about it. Still eating a lot of meat, especially because I'm a circus artist now and I do a lot of training. So I need to feel good when I do that.
So let me because you said you had open sores and cystic acne and you were malnourished and had IBS type stuff. What has all gotten better for you? What are the gains you've seen over the last year or two since you've been doing this?
The cystic acne is finally gone. And I had it all over my body and I don't really have it anywhere now. I get a little hormonal acne around my cycle, but that's it. IBS symptoms are gone. I haven't felt nauseous in a long time. I don't really deal with that anymore. I don't have the chronic diarrhea or the chronic constipation. I would yo-yo back and forth between the two. I'd either have diarrhea or I'd have really bad constipation. I don't have the same issues being physically active that I did before. I train 4 days a week in the circus arts doing aerial silks and stuff, which is pretty intense on the body, but I feel very good and I build a lot of muscle and I feel really strong. My depression is, pretty much gone. I still do deal with some anxiety, but I think that's more due to life circumstances and some of my past mistakes I haven't yet been able to fix. My joint pain is gone. Really, the only thing that I kind of deal with still is I still get some tension headaches, but I think that's just more due to stress and life circumstance than diet. It doesn't seem to, have anything to do with my food. And it's also not constant the way that it was. I get a headache a week, maybe. And it's all like, if I rub my neck and my shoulders enough, it can kind of go away. I'd say like 98% of the symptoms that were plaguing my life before making, I also dealt with chronic night sweat. So I would wake up every night just completely drenched. That doesn't really happen anymore. Not unless it's excessively hot where I am, which doesn't really happen that much. But yeah, most of my symptoms are gone. And even in reintroducing vegetables and fruits and a few grains, I'm able to hold the same energy levels and quality of life that I had when I was carnivore, because I have been able to eliminate those trigger foods, which were like mostly like cruciferous vegetables, wheat, artificial sweeteners, agave, stevia, anything soy, legumes. All of those things are things that I have completely eliminated and have not tried really to reintroduce. And my quality of life is still very good despite all of that.
Do you, and I don't know what the situation is with the U.S. Are you allowed to go back to the U.S. or would you be arrested, or what's the story there? Could you have to stay in Mexico, or how does that work for you?
I would be arrested. I am currently working on getting a lawyer in Ohio to help me get those charges dropped, which has proven difficult because they stopped court for like 2.5 years over COVID. Mm-hmm. And kept a bunch of people in jail that shouldn't have been in jail. So they have a backlog, and it's hard to get an attorney for a reasonable price. But I figure in like a year or two, that'll be a little different. And my plan is to get the charges dropped in the United States. And then I want to go back because like without charges, crossing the border without a passport, if you can prove you're an American, they just kind of look at you funny after you prove it and they let you in. At most you pay a fee for not having a visa. Where if I were to try to cross the border now, I would go directly to jail and probably prison, if not at least being on probation. So I'm basically just laying low in Mexico, because if I get deported also, I go directly to jail. So I kind of just lay low here as much as I can for having been featured in an HBO series. But it's surprisingly easy here. They just kind of let you exist, especially if you're not causing trouble. Like I'm very peaceful. I leave my house for the markets and my circus classes, and that's basically it. So it all depends on, luck and finding a good lawyer that can help me in Ohio and getting the money to be able to pay them to do it. But I have a strong feeling that within 5 years, maybe within 2 years, I can get these charges dropped, return to Ohio, get a proper passport, and then I would come back to Mexico legally, because I don't want to live in the United States, but I do want to be able to visit because I have family there and I have friends there. And I also don't want to live in Mexico illegally anymore. I want to come back, which isn't very, anarchist, agorist, but it is really hard to live without a bank account. It's really hard to live without papers, like Mexico is a beautiful country that I'm too afraid to travel in, which is sad, so I would rather leave, get a passport, come back, get a visa, and do things the proper way. That's my goal.
Yeah, you mentioned it's hard to live without, outside the framework of a government system. And there's a lot of concern, particularly with where the currency is going, if they have centralized bank digital currencies where, you're plugged into that system and you can't do anything. If they decide that they don't like the way you act or think, then they shut off your currency. And so there's some concerns around that a lot of people have expressed. Particularly, I know some people within particularly in the Bitcoin space, they're concerned about that potential future. How you'd mentioned you guys take cryptocurrency, or how does that work? How are you managing that?
Okay, so I get a lot of the jobs that I do, I get paid in crypto, but obviously not a lot of people in Mexico are accepting crypto at this point. So I'm really dependent. I have my new life partner who is a Mexican, and I really depend on his identity, for lack of a better way of putting it. I use his bank account. I use his identity to cash out my cryptocurrency to be able to pay my bills. I pay for things with Mexican pesos. So it's like, that's what's been tough, especially with the crypto thing. Because like I was involved in crypto. I got into it back in 2012, back when it was like $10 a coin. And back in those days, like it was you could exchange it and buy it without really any paperwork. And it's just gotten increasingly more difficult to exist in that way. It's kind of defeating the purpose of crypto in a lot of ways. But I will say that I am able to get paid. And when the crypto market is on the rise, I am able to make money off of what I earn if I hold on to it, which is not necessarily something I've ever been able to do with a fiat currency. When I hold a fiat currency, it either stays stable or I lose value in it, depending on what's going on. Yeah. I'm a strong believer in the privacy coins, the ones that you can't really see how much is sent where, but a lot of them have deep flaws in like the user experience that make it kind of shut off and closed off from the average user.
You mentioned, because I thought this was interesting, because a lot of what you did was centered around cannabis usage and production and sale. I guess that's what you guys are doing, and now you're off of that, or it sounds like you're off all that completely. Is that? Mm-hmm. Did you find that the carnivore diet helped you to be able to come off of that stuff?
I think to an extent, like while I was doing the carnivore diet, I was still definitely, I kept joking saying cannabis was the only plant I would still consume. But I did have the hunch that perhaps I was consuming it too much. Perhaps I was relying on it too much. And being on the carnivore diet allowed me to get my body to a healthier state where I could start looking for something that I really enjoyed, physically speaking, for the sake of, like working out and stuff like that, which is another big key to health. It was about 9 months doing the circus stuff, at least 3-4 times a week, where I realized that I started to get the gut instinct of like, hey, maybe I don't need the cannabis anymore. Like it stopped serving the chronic pain use when I started doing the carnivore diet, because I was using it for all sorts of chronic pain that I was dealing with, all the nausea, all of that. And it was only an emotional thing that I was using it for anxiety, for management of my autism and my ADHD. And then I realized that doing the circus arts, which I see somebody's asking about that, it's aerial silks, it's the trapeze, it's the aerial hoop, anything aerial, I'm going to try it because there's something about flying through the air suspended by your own weight that's a little addicting in its own way. But yeah, 3 months ago, a friend of mine sent me an article that was basically like, this study implies that chronic use has an effect on your pancreas, which has an effect on your ability to digest things, has an effect on all sorts of your systems. And I was starting to nail down some of my remaining issues to issues with my pancreas directly. And I decided I was just going to quit about 3.5 months ago. I was like, fine, I'm going to quit. And I found pretty quickly that as long as I keep trigger foods out of my diet and continually do what makes me happy with the circus stuff, I have no craving or need or desire for cannabis, which is a little ironic considering how much of my identity I based around it before. But yeah, it's one of those things where if you can find both a way of eating and a way of exercising your body that you enjoy and that's good for you, you don't necessarily need to rely on the crutch of things like cannabis, or any other substances for that matter.
I'm just curious because you're doing stuff with the circus. You're kind of living more or less kind of like a fugitive in Mexico. Where do you hope to be in 10 years? What is the plan? Are you thinking about having a family, or I don't know what your goals are down the road?
Ideally, I want to get my legal situation fixed first. And then from there, I want to be able to travel and see all of Mexico. I wouldn't mind joining a traveling circus of some kind if I can get to that point. Like, I've already gotten to basically a semi-professional state within about a year of doing the circus stuff. I'm kind of a natural at it. I'm not sure about starting a family eventually, but I do know that like my body is finally to a point to where if I did want to do that, I could be able to handle it and support making that happen. Whereas like, before when I started carnivore, I at that time, I was sure that I wanted a family, but I was also sure that my body was not healthy enough like to justify doing that. Cause you have a healthy body. And even if you do manage to get pregnant and bring a child into the world, you can really suffer, and that child can really suffer. And that was not something I was interested in doing. But yeah, I really just want to get to a point where I'm legally not worried. And then I'm just going to continue to take care of myself and enjoy my life and see my family and friends. And I want to write a book about my experiences eventually. Yeah, just keep working and keep doing what makes me happy. That's really my 10-year plan, is to just get the legal stuff fixed and then see how I feel after that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm just wondering, are all the states the same? Like if you went to a state where the laws weren't what they were in Ohio, would you have any more protection than you would if you went back to Ohio?
The way it works is, let's say you get picked up for, like, I consider staying in Oregon, for example, but let's say you get picked up by the police in Oregon and they run your name. They find out that you have a warrant. Well, generally they take you in, they put you in jail until they can contact where you're wanted from and be like, hey, are you going to come get this person? And something I noticed when I was in jail talking to people is the state of Ohio is known for going and getting people from anywhere. My partner is in jail with somebody who had ran from child support payments, of all things. He ran to Alaska. And they picked him up in Alaska. They just pulled him over for something and realized that he was a fugitive from Ohio, and he ended up back in Ohio. Ohio came for him. So it's down to the state. From my understanding, had I gotten in trouble in Oregon and ran somewhere else, Oregon's not really a state that will come after you. If you're found, that's going to cost us a lot of money to bring you back here and to incarcerate you. It's not worth it. Whereas Ohio is known for, they don't care where you are in the United States, but if you get picked up, they're going to come for you.
Why won't they come for you in Mexico? Is there, I don't know what the extradition laws are there.
The extradition laws are part of why I came to Mexico. You can be extradited from Mexico, but Mexico considers a lot of what the United States does to be cruel and unusual punishment. And it's one of those things where, like, the state of Ohio could go to Mexico and be like, we know she's here. We know this is where she is. And Mexico could just say, okay, we recognize that she's here. We recognize that she's wanted for these crimes, but we're not going after her. And if Mexico says no, then they can't do anything about it. But that being said, from my understanding, if Mexico says yes, there is a lot of cost, like way more cost than there would be, say, with flying me from Alaska or flying me from California or something to get me back to Ohio. It's a lot more trouble than it's worth. And I feel like if the state of Ohio, especially me being as well known as I am, if the state of Ohio paid, however many tens of thousands of dollars it would take to get me back there, it would look pretty shitty considering, like, while I was in jail, there was a guy that had been arrested for child molestation, let out on a PR bond, which is the signature bond. So, I mean,
yeah, I get it. Yeah, and some people say that. Again, I don't know the specifics of what's going on with state of Ohio, but do you? I mean, as far as your day-to-day life, you said you've kind of, you have to use your partner's identification to get around and stuff like that. Did you learn Spanish while you're there? I mean, how do you function in society?
That's something I'm still working on. I definitely know enough Spanish to buy things at the markets and then negotiate with people. I know enough Spanish to take my circus classes and yoga classes in Spanish, but I'm still very much at the point, like, I can write in Spanish, I can read it, I can understand it, but I struggle in the moment to speak. Like, I'm having the issue where somebody will ask me something and I'll know exactly what they're asking me, but I can't think of how to say it until maybe a few hours later when I'm alone and it's not important anymore. And then the sentence will pop into my head with proper grammar. But yeah, I'm getting there, but I'm definitely not fluent by any means. I'm definitely not reaching fluent. I am just at a survival Spanish standpoint for the most part.
Have you found that either the diet or the removal of cannabis or the combination has helped you cognitively? Has it helped you with your mental sharpness and focus?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's definitely something to be said about feeling good and being able to think better. I am way more productive in terms of getting things done. A lot of what I do is like WordPress work and graphic design work, which does take a certain level of mental ability to be able to accomplish it. And I notice definitely, like, if I accidentally have a trigger food, for example, the first thing to go along with not feeling good is I can't focus, I can't think. And that's definitely improved a lot since quitting cannabis. It's part of why I haven't had any interest in starting to use cannabis again, because I didn't realize how much it would essentially mentally scramble me. And the whole idea was to get myself to relax, but I was smoking it all the time. So like I was always in the state of anxiety of like, okay, now I'm relaxed and I don't want to do anything, but I have these things to do. And I can't do them because I can't focus on them enough to do them. And it was kind of a vicious cycle that has been more or less stopped. I also stopped having panic attacks and extreme anxiety symptoms when I stopped smoking cannabis, which I really didn't expect. I thought it was managing my anxiety, and it turns out it was making it worse.
Well, I'll tell you, Lily, we're running out of time here. It's been a pleasure getting to chat with you and talk with you. Normally, I tell people to tell us where people can go to find you, but maybe you don't want that information out there. I don't know. Are you doing anything online, or are people?
Yeah, I have a website. It's highlyfunctionalgrowth.com, all one word. And that's where I blog about my experiences. That also has links to all my social media. It's one of those things where like, I don't tell people where I live anymore. Part of the problem in Acapulco is like everybody, even random strangers, knew where we lived. That was nerve-wracking. And then it led to what it led to in a lot of ways, whereas nobody really knows where I live now specifically. But I exist online. I share a lot of my experiences online, like on Instagram and TikTok. I share a lot of my circus stuff. And, I'm still on Facebook, but I'm just more careful about it now. I kind of figure like the state of Ohio has had an idea of where I've been for, most of the 7 years that I've been here, and they haven't really done anything about it. My biggest worry is coming in contact with immigration on a happen chance thing. But that hasn't happened yet, and I'm pretty careful to make sure it doesn't happen. So yeah, come find me at highlyfunctionalgrowth.com, and that's really the easiest way to contact me.
Okay. Well, Lily, thank you very much. Best of luck. I hope things work out for you and you get straightened out. I'm glad you discovered a diet that's helping you, and, hopefully other people will be helped. And even amongst the agorist anarchist community, I think a better diet is always a good thing. So thank you so much.
Thank you for talking about this stuff, because it really helped me to get hope for life again.
Well, I'm glad we could do that for you. All right, rest of you guys, we'll see you guys back tomorrow. Everybody have a great day.
All right.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Bye.